The dark corridors of Malfoy Manor echoed with the quiet rustling of robes as Bellatrix Lestrange paced back and forth in the dimly lit room. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, her loyalty to the Dark Lord as unyielding as ever. But tonight, something in the air was different. There was a change, something new. Voldemort's return had altered the dynamics of their secretive world. The Dark Lord, once feared for his ruthlessness, had begun to show glimpses of something more complex. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Bellatrix could sense it, like a shadow lurking in the depths of his piercing red eyes. She had always admired him, from the moment she had first pledged herself to him, her devotion unwavering. But now she found herself questioning. Why did he look at her that way during their last meeting? Why did he seem to hesitate, if only for a moment, when he had ordered her to kill? Bellatrix wasn't one to let such thoughts cloud her judgment, yet they lingered, gnawing at her like an itch she couldn't scratch. The door creaked open, and in walked the Dark Lord, his tall, serpentine figure imposing as ever. He didn't speak at first, simply regarded her with that unsettling gaze, as if weighing her very soul. Bellatrix's heart quickened, though she dared not show it. She dropped to her knees, her dark hair falling around her face like a veil. "Bellatrix," he finally spoke, his voice as cold and commanding as ever. But there was something more, something softer in the tone. "My lord," she said, her voice steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. She dared not meet his gaze directly, but she could feel his presence surrounding her. "You have served me loyally," he continued, pacing slowly before her. "But loyalty alone is not enough. I require more from you. You have proven yourself in battle, in death, and in your commitment to our cause, but now I need something else." Bellatrix's eyes shot up, the thrill of uncertainty pulsing through her veins. "What is it, my lord?" His eyes gleamed as he spoke, his lips curling into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You are too loyal, too eager. You think only of me, of the Dark Lord. But what if you were to think of yourself, of us?" Bellatrix's breath caught in her throat. "Us, my lord." Voldemort stopped in front of her, towering above her with an aura of terrifying power. "Yes, Bellatrix, you and I." He extended his hand, a delicate yet deliberate gesture that left her in stunned silence. Her mind raced, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of his words. Could it be possible? Was he offering her something more than mere servitude? For the briefest of moments, Bellatrix dared to look into his eyes. There, amidst the abyss of his gaze, she saw something she had never dared to hope for. A flicker of warmth, a spark of connection. She took his hand almost instinctively, and in that moment the bond between them deepened. The Dark Lord was not simply using her as a tool. There was a recognition, a shared understanding between them that had never existed before. Bellatrix knew deep down that this was a turning point. Whatever path this new bond would take, it would change everything. Voldemort looked at her, a faint dark satisfaction in his expression. "You are more than just a follower, Bellatrix. You are essential. Together, we will reshape the world, not just through power, but through something more profound." Bellatrix's mind swirled with possibilities, her emotions at war with each other. She had always been fiercely loyal, but now, for the first time, she found herself feeling something that went beyond her devotion to the Dark Lord. Was it love? Could it be? She couldn't be sure, but one thing was certain. Whatever this new connection between them was, it would forever alter the course of their destinies. And perhaps it was exactly what the world needed, an alliance forged not in cruelty, but in something deeper, something more personal. As the night grew darker and the shadows deepened around them, Bellatrix Lestrange found herself standing on the precipice of a new, dangerous path. One that would lead her into the heart of Voldemort's power, and perhaps into the depths of her own desires. The days following their quiet, unexpected exchange at Malfoy Manor were fraught with tension. Bellatrix couldn't shake the memory of the Dark Lord's words, nor the feel of his hand in hers. She had always been so certain of her place in his world, so confident that her loyalty was the only thing that mattered. But now there was a new weight in her chest, a curious longing she hadn't expected. She kept to her duties, of course. The Dark Lord's will remained her highest priority. There were orders to be carried out, enemies to be eliminated, and schemes to unfold. But in the quiet moments when she was alone, Bellatrix couldn't help but wonder. Was this more than just a fleeting connection? Did Voldemort feel it too? Her thoughts were interrupted one evening when she was summoned to the Forbidden Forest. It was a cold night, the air thick with the chill of winter, as she made her way to the clearing where the Dark Lord stood, waiting. His tall, slender form was silhouetted against the darkened sky, a figure of pure menace. "Bellatrix," he said, his voice soft yet commanding as she approached. "You are late. I apologize, my lord," she replied quickly, lowering her gaze. She hadn't meant to keep him waiting, though the delay had given her more time to think. Time to analyze the way he had spoken to her in the past few days. There was something different about his demeanor, something almost tender, if tenderness could exist in his world. "You have been distracted," Voldemort said, his red eyes narrowing as if reading her thoughts. "Your mind is elsewhere." Bellatrix tensed but held her ground. "No, my lord. I am fully focused on our mission." "Are you?" He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, and she fought the urge to take a step back. "Tell me, Bellatrix, what is it that keeps you awake at night? What is it you truly desire?" It was the question she had been dreading. It wasn't that she didn't know the answer. It was that the answer frightened her. For the first time in her life, she was unsure. Her devotion had always been her anchor. But now, there was this strange pull, a desire to be more than just a tool. She wanted to understand what this bond between them meant, to feel something beyond power and control. I want to serve you, my lord," she said, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "I want to see your reign fulfilled, to destroy those who stand in our way. You are my only master." Voldemort's lips curled into a dark smile. "And yet, that is not all. You do not just want to serve me, do you, Bellatrix?" His voice dropped, a hint of something almost like amusement in it. "You want something more. Something personal." The words sent a shiver down her spine. Was he toying with her, or was this a recognition of what she had been feeling? Bellatrix dared to meet his gaze, her breath shallow as she spoke her truth. "I have always been yours, my lord," she said, her voice steady despite the heat that rushed through her. "But I want to understand. I want to know why. Why this bond between us feels so different." Voldemort regarded her silently for a moment, and for the first time in years, Bellatrix thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something raw and almost human. The Dark Lord took a step closer, his face inches from hers. "You think I am like the others," he whispered, his voice a low hiss. "You think I do not feel, but I have been betrayed too many times to trust in love, Bellatrix. It is not weakness that holds me back. It is survival. To love is to be vulnerable, and I am not vulnerable." His words cut deep, yet Bellatrix could not look away. The truth of what he said resonated with her. Voldemort's heart had been hardened by betrayal, by loss, by his insatiable hunger for power. But even he, the Dark Lord, could not escape the pull of connection, the yearning for something beyond domination. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, Voldemort placed his hand on her cheek, a gesture that both terrified and thrilled her. "Do not mistake my words, Bellatrix," he murmured. "I am not like them. But perhaps we can understand each other. Perhaps together we can create something beyond what either of us has ever known." Bellatrix's heart raced. She had never imagined such words from him. The Dark Lord, capable of such cruelty, was now offering her something else. Something she had longed for, yet never believed could exist between them. As his fingers traced her jawline, Bellatrix found herself caught in a storm of emotions, desire, fear, and an overwhelming sense of power. This was no longer just about serving him. This was about something else entirely. Their worlds had collided, and there was no going back. The days following their encounter in the Forbidden Forest were a blur for Bellatrix. She threw herself back into her duties with a single-minded focus. But the weight of what had transpired between her and Voldemort lingered, ever present. His touch, His words, they haunted her, fueling a fire inside her that refused to be extinguished. She knew the other Death Eaters had noticed the change in her. The way she carried herself now, with a new sense of purpose, a quiet confidence. They could sense the shift in the air, but none dared to ask the questions that burned in their minds. The Dark Lord's inner circle was bound by fear, loyalty, and ambition. Bellatrix had always been a product of those forces, but now there was something else, something that set her apart from the rest. Voldemort, too, seemed to carry the weight of their new bond. It wasn't obvious to those around him, but Bellatrix could see it in his rare moments of stillness. In the brief seconds when their eyes met across a room, there was a flicker of understanding, an unspoken communication between them that transcended words. He had never been a man of emotions, and yet Bellatrix felt a pull toward him that went beyond mere loyalty. It wasn't love, not in the traditional sense. It couldn't be. But it was something, a deep, raw connection that was just as dangerous as it was intoxicating. One evening, as the firelight flickered in the great hall of Malfoy Manor, Bellatrix found herself alone with Voldemort. The other Death Eaters had been dismissed, their voices fading as the door shut behind them. There was no one else in the room, just the two of them, standing in the silence. Bellatrix. Voldemort spoke her name, his voice low and deliberate, as though testing the air between them. There is more to our mission than you realize. Bellatrix didn't speak immediately, her gaze fixed on him. The way he said her name, so deliberate as though it held weight, sent a shiver down her spine. She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "My lord," she said softly, "I understand the importance of our mission. I would die to see it fulfilled." Voldemort's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You would die for me, but would you live for me, Bellatrix?" The question took her by surprise. She had never questioned her loyalty to him, never wondered if there was something more she could offer him. She had always believed that her devotion was enough. But now, in this moment, with his piercing gaze fixed on hers, she felt as though he was asking for more. "I live for you, my lord," she replied, her voice steady. But inside, a question lingered. What was he asking of her? What did this connection mean? Voldemort stepped closer, his face mere inches from hers, and for a moment there was nothing but the silence between them. The air was thick with anticipation, and Bellatrix's heart pounded in her chest. She knew what he was capable of, what he had done to others. But this felt different. This wasn't an order, this wasn't a command, this was something else entirely. "You are mine, Bellatrix," Voldemort said, his voice barely above a whisper, the word sending a tremor through her. "But you are more than just a servant. You are essential." The word hung in the air, heavy and laden with meaning. Bellatrix felt a surge of emotion, desire, fear, and something deeper, something raw, something she could not name. It was terrifying, the way he could make her feel so vulnerable and yet so powerful at the same time. "I understand, my lord," she said, her voice breathless. Voldemort stepped back, his expression unreadable. "Do you?" Bellatrix nodded, though she wasn't sure she truly did. All she knew was that everything had changed. The Dark Lord was no longer just a figure of fear. He was something more, a force, a presence that consumed her thoughts, her very soul. But there was still so much they had yet to explore, so many questions, so many uncertainties. "Then prove it," Voldemort said, his tone sharp. "Prove that you are as devoted to me as you claim. Show me that you are not simply a weapon but something more." His words were a challenge, and Bellatrix accepted it without hesitation. She had always been a weapon for him, a tool to be used and discarded. But now she wanted to prove that she was more than that. She wanted to show him that she could be the one thing he had never truly allowed himself to have. Someone who stood by him not out of fear, but out of choice. With a sense of resolve, Bellatrix took a step forward, closing the distance between them. The Dark Lord's eyes flickered, though he made no move to stop her. "I am yours, my lord," she whispered, her voice steady, "and I will prove it to you." Voldemort's eyes searched hers for a long moment before he nodded, his expression unreadable. Then let us see if you truly understand what it means to be mine, he said, his voice colder than ever. And in that moment, Bellatrix knew that whatever path they walked together, it would lead them both down a dangerous, uncharted road, one that could either destroy them or bind them in a way neither had ever anticipated. The weeks that followed their quiet, charged encounter were marked by a subtle but undeniable shift. Bellatrix's commitment to the Dark Lord deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated, and Voldemort's presence in her life, once an almost abstract force, began to consume her every thought. Her nights were filled with dreams of him, dreams where the line between master and servant blurred, where she was both his devoted follower and his equal. The idea of such a relationship both terrified and exhilarated her. She had always been loyal, but now there was something more. There was an unspoken bond between them, a tether that pulled her toward him, even when they were apart. In the heart of the Death Eater stronghold, Malfoy Manor, Bellatrix could feel the weight of their unspoken connection. As the Dark Lord's right hand, she was privy to his plans, his schemes, and his every command. But even in the midst of their growing power, the true nature of their relationship remained shrouded in mystery, both to her and to the others in the Order of the Phoenix. There was a delicate balance, a tightrope she walked, never fully able to reconcile her desire with the cold, unyielding nature of Voldemort. Yet, it was in the quiet moments when they were alone that Bellatrix began to see a side of Voldemort she had never considered before. A side that, while still ruthless and calculating, showed a rare vulnerability. It was in the way his eyes lingered on her, the soft tremor in his voice when they spoke, the way he trusted her, even when he didn't trust anyone else. One evening, Bellatrix was summoned to the Dark Lord's private chambers, a place few had ever seen. The stone walls were cold and unwelcoming, the air thick with an ominous energy that made her skin crawl. Yet as she entered the room, she felt the familiar pull toward him. There was something in the air tonight, something that felt different. Voldemort was waiting, his long serpentine form silhouetted against the darkened windows. His crimson eyes gleamed in the dim light, sharp and calculating, yet there was an undeniable softness in the way he looked at her. "Bellatrix," he said, his voice low, almost intimate. "You have been loyal. You have proven your worth time and time again. But tonight, I need something more from you." Bellatrix's heart raced. She knew the Dark Lord never made requests lightly. His words were always sharp, deliberate, and calculated. What could he possibly want from her now? "My lord," she began, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "Whatever you ask, I am ready." Voldemort took a step toward her, his presence overwhelming. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of his gaze heavy upon her. Then he spoke again, his words soft, almost reluctant. "I have seen your devotion," he said. "But devotion alone is not enough. There is power in our connection, Bellatrix. A power that transcends loyalty. A power that can shape the very fabric of our world." Bellatrix didn't speak. She simply stood there, absorbing his words, trying to understand the full depth of what he was saying. She had always known that her loyalty to him was her greatest strength, but now it seemed that there was something else, something darker, more potent, lurking beneath the surface. "You have always been a weapon," Voldemort continued, his voice growing colder, "a tool to be used when necessary. But now, I need you to become something more. I need you to prove that you are worthy of the power I offer." Bellatrix's pulse quickened. She had never thought of herself as anything more than a tool for the Dark Lord, but now, as he spoke those words, she realized that she had become something else. She had become a key player in his world, a force that could either strengthen or destroy him. "I am ready, my lord," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Voldemort regarded her silently for a long moment before nodding, his expression unreadable. "Then prove it. Show me that you are capable of more than blind loyalty. Show me that you can control the power between us." For the first time, Bellatrix felt a true challenge, not just from Voldemort but from herself. What did he mean by controlling the power between them? Was it simply about servitude? Or was there something more he expected from her? As if reading her thoughts, Voldemort stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. There is a power in understanding the connection we share. It is not simply about obedience, Bellatrix. It is about understanding the darkness within you, embracing it, and using it to fuel our mission. Bellatrix's heart thundered in her chest. She had always been a servant, a follower, but now she was being asked to take control of her own power, to wield it alongside his. The prospect both thrilled and terrified her. "I understand, my lord," she whispered, her voice steady. "I will do whatever it takes." Voldemort's lips curled into a dark smile, though it was laced with something almost imperceptible. Satisfaction, perhaps. "Good. Then let us see how far your loyalty can truly go." In that moment, Bellatrix realized that her path had irrevocably changed. She was no longer just a follower, no longer just a weapon. She was something else entirely, something bound to the Dark Lord by a force that was both dangerous and intoxicating. And as the night stretched on, she knew that the journey ahead would test not only her devotion, but her very understanding of power, loyalty, and love. The days after Voldemort's challenge were some of the most difficult Bellatrix had ever faced. The weight of his words lingered, echoing in her mind as she carried out her tasks. But now, everything had shifted. She wasn't merely carrying out orders, she was tasked with something far more personal, something deeper than she could have ever anticipated. Each night she lay awake, wrestling with the darkness inside her. Voldemort had asked her to understand the power between them, to control it, to embrace the connection that tied them together. But what did that truly mean? She had always believed that loyalty, unwavering and absolute, was enough. But now that foundation seemed like a mere stepping stone. Now, she was being asked to step into a role she wasn't sure she was prepared for. As the days turned into weeks, Bellatrix began to notice changes in herself. She had always been fierce, always been the devoted follower, but now there was a quiet confidence in her movements, a sense of power that came not just from serving the Dark Lord, but from being in his orbit. She felt the darkness within her stir, beckoning her to tap into it. The power of the Dark Lord was hers to claim, just as it had always been his. But it was more than that. It was a shared darkness, something unique, something that could shape the world. Voldemort had given her a purpose, one that went beyond mere obedience. He had shown her that she was capable of something more. But was she truly ready to embrace it? One evening, Bellatrix found herself once again summoned to the private chambers of the Dark Lord. The air was thick with tension as she stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Voldemort was standing near the far wall, his back to her as he stared into the fire. The shadows seemed to dance across his face, adding to the mystery of his presence. "You've been thinking," he said, his voice a low rasp without turning to face her. Bellatrix hesitated for a moment before replying. "Yes, my lord, I've been contemplating your words." Voldemort turned to face her then, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "And what have you learned?" She swallowed, her throat dry. "I've learned that there is more to my loyalty than I've ever understood. I've learned that my power can be used, not just for you, but with you." A slow, almost imperceptible smile curled at the corners of Voldemort's lips. "And you understand what that means, Bellatrix?" "I do," she said, her voice firm now. "It means that I am not just your servant. I am your equal." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and charged. Bellatrix had spoken them without thinking, but the moment they left her lips, she realized the gravity of what she had said. Was it true? Could she truly stand as an equal to the Dark Lord, the most powerful dark wizard to ever exist? Voldemort's gaze never wavered. "You are mine, Bellatrix. You will always be mine. But perhaps there is something to your words." Bellatrix's heart raced. Was this approval? Or was he simply testing her once more? She couldn't tell, but she didn't need to know. What mattered was the power she now understood flowed between them. A power that went beyond the bonds of loyalty, beyond the fear and darkness that defined their existence. There was something else, something stronger than either of them could fully understand. "You will prove it then," Voldemort said, breaking the silence. "You will prove that you are not merely a reflection of my power, but that you have power of your own. We will test this connection, and we will see if it is truly as potent as you believe." Bellatrix's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she would either prove herself worthy of the Dark Lord's trust or fail and lose everything. She nodded. "I will do whatever it takes, my lord." Voldemort's eyes glowed with an unsettling intensity as he stepped closer to her. "Very well," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let us see if you can truly control the darkness within you." Before she could react, Voldemort raised his wand, the tip glowing with a dark, magical energy. He extended it toward her, the power flowing from him in a tendril of darkness that curled around her like a living thing. Bellatrix could feel it. The weight of his magic, the intensity of it as it pressed against her mind, trying to break her. But Bellatrix was ready. Closing her eyes, she focused, calling forth the dark power that had always been a part of her. The darkness inside her surged, answering the call. It was as though it had been waiting for this moment, this challenge. She felt the surge of energy flow through her, a cold, sharp, exhilarating sensation that consumed her every sense. Voldemort's magic, though powerful, was no longer something she merely obeyed. It was something she could now control, channeling her own inner darkness to meet his. Her own power, once a mere flicker of potential, had blossomed into something much greater, stronger, more dangerous. The room seemed to pulse with the energy between them as Bellatrix steadied herself. The darkness that Voldemort had unleashed was still wrapping around her, trying to find a weakness to twist her mind. But Bellatrix resisted, focusing on her own darkness, her own fury. She could feel the Dark Lord watching her, his gaze cold but full of something she hadn't seen in him before, curiosity. The two forces clashed, swirling around them both in a violent dance. Bellatrix could feel her control over the magic growing with each passing second. It was raw, untamed, but it was hers. She had always been fierce, but this was something more. She wasn't just a servant now. She wasn't simply the tool of his will. She was something powerful in her own right. Her hands trembled with the surge of energy, her heart pounding in her chest, but she didn't falter. Slowly, the pressure of Voldemort's magic began to relent, the tendrils loosening as she gained ground. She could feel his presence shifting, sensing his surprise and something deeper, something akin to respect. Bellatrix's eyes locked with his, her breath shallow but her voice steady. "I understand, my lord. I know what I am capable of now." For the first time in the years she had served him, Voldemort's expression softened, though only slightly. His cold demeanor never faltered, but there was a flicker in his eyes, something that bordered on approval, or perhaps something else entirely. "You have surprised me, Bellatrix," Voldemort said, his voice low, tinged with an unexpected warmth that sent a shiver down her spine. "You have proven that your power is not just a reflection of mine. You are more than just a servant." Bellatrix felt a rush of triumph. This was the moment she had worked for, the moment when the Dark Lord recognized her power as something beyond mere obedience. For so long she had only seen herself through his eyes, as an extension of his will. But now, in this moment of shared strength, she saw herself as something else, something that had its own place in the world, in the darkness. But even as the words of approval echoed in her mind, she knew there was more to it. Voldemort had recognized her power, but in doing so, he had raised the stakes. There was no going back. She was no longer just a tool in his hands. She was something more dangerous, something that could either strengthen or challenge his own dominance. And that was a dangerous position to be in, especially with someone like Voldemort. Her heart raced as the magic between them began to dissipate, leaving an eerie calm in its wake. Voldemort took a step back, his gaze never leaving her. "You've passed the test," he said, his voice as cold as ever. "But remember, Bellatrix, power is never without its cost. You will walk a fine line from here on out. Our bond is more than just a weapon. It is something that will shape us both." The weight of his words settled heavily on her shoulders. She had crossed a threshold, and though she had gained his respect, she knew that this was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, trials that would test her loyalty, her power, and her very resolve. But she was ready. "I understand, my lord," she said quietly. "I will not fail you." Voldemort regarded her for a moment longer, his eyes narrowing as if reading her very soul. Then, with a small nod, he turned away, signaling that the conversation was over. Bellatrix stood in the silence, her heart still racing, but a deep sense of fulfillment settling within her. As she turned to leave, she knew that things had irrevocably changed. The connection between her and Voldemort had been forged anew, not just through fear or loyalty, but through power, shared, untamed power that could either bind them together or tear them apart. The uncertainty of that thought lingered, but Bellatrix pushed it aside. There was no room for doubt. She would follow him, stand by him, and help him realize his dark vision. And in doing so, she would carve out her place at his side, whatever the cost. The days following her trial by fire with Voldemort felt like a blur to Bellatrix. She could still feel the residual hum of power that had surged through her, and it both terrified and exhilarated her. What she had once thought of as unshakable loyalty had morphed into something more dangerous, more consuming. Her connection with Voldemort was no longer just that of a follower to her master. It was something darker, something that intertwined their fates in ways she hadn't fully understood until now. Though Bellatrix had proven her power, her control, she knew that Voldemort's approval was always fleeting. He demanded more than just a display of strength. He wanted obedience, unrelenting devotion to his vision. And that was where the true test lay. She had come close to becoming something more than a servant, something equal, but there was still a long road ahead. In the days that followed, Bellatrix found herself increasingly drawn to the deeper, more private moments with Voldemort. They were few and far between, but each time they seemed to draw her closer to him. There was a strange power in the intimacy of their conversations, even when they were mostly silent, and Bellatrix knew that something was beginning to form between them. Something unspoken, but undeniable. One evening, after a particularly violent raid on a Muggle village, Bellatrix found herself summoned to Voldemort's chambers again. Her robes were torn, her hands stained with blood, but the thrill of the night's carnage was still buzzing through her veins. The violence, the bloodshed, it was intoxicating. It was what had always kept her loyal, what had always driven her forward. But now there was more. Now there was something else driving her, a need to be closer to him, to understand him more fully. She arrived at his chambers, the heavy door creaking as she pushed it open. Voldemort was standing near the center of the room, his back to her as usual, his figure draped in shadows. The firelight flickered behind him, casting a long, twisted shadow on the stone wall. For a moment, Bellatrix hesitated, but then she stepped forward, her heart pounding as she closed the distance between them. "My lord," she said, her voice steady, though she could feel the warmth of the blood on her skin still seeping into her bones. "The task is complete." Voldemort didn't turn around immediately, but when he did, his gaze locked onto hers, his crimson eyes flickering with a strange intensity. There was something in the air between them, something that buzzed with anticipation. "You have done well, Bellatrix," he said, his voice cold, yet there was a note of something more in it, something warmer, more personal. "But your loyalty has always been unquestionable. I have come to expect nothing less from you." She bowed her head slightly, acknowledging his praise, but she knew that this wasn't just about the mission. This wasn't about her loyalty anymore. It was about something deeper, something she wasn't fully ready to admit. "My lord," she began cautiously, "there is something I must understand. You've always been distant, always so cold, and yet I find myself yearning to understand you more. What is it that drives you? What is it that you truly want?" The question hung in the air like a delicate thread between them, and for the first time Bellatrix felt vulnerable. She had never questioned him before. She had never dared to challenge his intentions or seek understanding. But something in her had changed. She needed to know what lay beneath the cold exterior, what fueled his endless ambition. Voldemort didn't speak right away. He simply regarded her with that same penetrating gaze, as if he were deciding whether to reveal a part of himself. The silence between them stretched long, making Bellatrix uncomfortable, but she didn't look away. She had asked the question, and now she had to face whatever response he gave. At last he spoke, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "What drives me, Bellatrix? It is the need for control. Power, absolute and unwavering. I desire a world where fear rules, where all bow to me. I do not seek power for the sake of power alone, but for the control it brings. It is a means to shape the world, to reshape it into something I deem worthy." He paused for a moment, his eyes still fixed on her, as if gauging her response. Bellatrix felt a cold shiver run down her spine, but there was something else there, too. A flicker of something familiar, something she couldn't quite place. "And you?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "What drives you, Bellatrix? What makes you continue to follow me, to serve me with such zeal?" Bellatrix's breath caught in her throat. She had never considered this question before, at least not in such direct terms. What drove her? Was it the power, the violence, the fear that had shaped her entire life? Or was it something else entirely? Something she wasn't fully aware of yet? Her answer came out almost by instinct, raw and honest. "It is you, my lord. It has always been you. I am yours, body, mind, and soul. I live to serve you, to help bring your vision to life. Without you, I am nothing." Voldemort's expression didn't change, but his eyes seemed to soften just for a moment before he turned away again, his voice as cold as ever. "Your loyalty is admirable, Bellatrix, but it is not just loyalty that will ensure your place beside me. It is power, strength, and you have both. But remember, there is always more to be gained. Always." The finality in his words left no room for argument, and Bellatrix understood. She had earned his trust, but now she needed to prove that she could live up to it. There was more at stake than just her loyalty. It was her very existence, her place in this world of darkness, that would be determined by the path she chose from here on out. As she turned to leave, the weight of his words hung in the air like a curse. The months that followed Bellatrix's conversation with Voldemort were marked by a growing tension. The world outside their hidden sanctuary continued to burn with chaos, as the Dark Lord's forces spread fear and death across the wizarding world. The resistance, however, was growing stronger. Dumbledore's army had been joined by scattered pockets of resistance, and every day brought new reports of skirmishes, deaths, and betrayals. But for Bellatrix, the battles outside were secondary. What mattered now was the battle she faced within herself. Her connection with Voldemort had deepened. It wasn't just that they shared power anymore. It was something more intimate, more complicated. There were moments when Bellatrix felt his presence even when he wasn't near, as though their minds were bound in a way that went beyond their physical proximity. She could feel his anger, his triumph, his fear. His every emotion, his every thought, seemed to ripple through her like waves crashing against the shore. But it was more than that. She had begun to see him in a new light, not just as the Dark Lord she had served for so long, but as a person. A man driven by insatiable ambition, by an unyielding desire to control the world around him. He was more than a figure of terror. He was a broken soul, driven by an endless hunger for power and revenge. At times, Bellatrix found herself drawn to him in ways she couldn't explain. When they were together, it wasn't just a meeting of dark minds or a display of mutual power. There was something magnetic. It was as if she had become entwined with him on a level she couldn't escape, couldn't free herself from, even if she wanted to. But the truth was, she didn't want to escape. There was something intoxicating about the way he made her feel, like she was both insignificant and irreplaceable at once. One evening, after a particularly brutal raid in which Bellatrix had led her Death Eaters in hunting down Muggleborns, she returned to the Dark Lord's lair, feeling exhilarated by the violence she had unleashed. Blood stained her hands. But there was a thrill in it, a dark satisfaction she couldn't find anywhere else. The feeling of absolute power coursed through her veins, and she knew that there was no turning back from this path. Voldemort was waiting for her when she entered the chamber. He stood by the fireplace, his profile sharp and cold in the flickering light. She could tell he had been waiting for her, and a strange tension filled the air between them. "My lord," Bellatrix said, her voice steady though her pulse raced. "The task is complete. The mudbloods are no more." Voldemort didn't turn to look at her immediately, but she could feel his eyes on her, assessing her, as if he were looking into her very soul. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured. "You've done well, Bellatrix," he said, his tone as cold as ever, but there was something else there, something that sent a shiver through her. "But your power grows, and with it, the danger." Bellatrix swallowed, but she didn't break eye contact. She had been expecting this. She knew that the power she had come to control was not something to be taken lightly. It could be as much of a curse as a blessing, especially in the Dark Lord's world, where betrayal and fear ruled. "I understand, my lord," she replied, her voice unwavering. "But I will not falter. I will not let the power I wield control me. It is mine to command." For a moment there was silence between them, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Voldemort's gaze softened, but only slightly, as if he were considering her words. Then, with a swift motion, he turned and crossed the room to stand before her. "You've proven yourself, Bellatrix," he said, his voice barely above a whisper now. "But you must understand that the path you walk now is more dangerous than you know. Power is seductive, and it can twist even the most devoted. You must never forget that." Bellatrix's heart raced at his proximity, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she stood her ground, meeting his gaze with a fierceness that matched his own. "I am yours, my lord," she said, her voice firm, "and I will never forget what I am. My loyalty to you is unquestionable." Voldemort's eyes gleamed with something unreadable, and for a moment, Bellatrix thought she saw something like approval in his gaze. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the cold, calculating expression she was so familiar with. "You are more than loyal, Bellatrix," he said softly. "You are becoming a force in your own right. You understand power in a way few others do, but that power will not go untested." Bellatrix nodded, her pulse still racing. She had always known that loyalty was never enough. Power, strength, those were the true currencies in Voldemort's world, and she had come to understand them more deeply than ever before. Voldemort's gaze never left her as he spoke again, his voice a soft hiss in the stillness of the room. "There are many in my ranks who would use your power for their own gain, Bellatrix. Do not let them. Do not let anyone control you." The weight of his words sank deep into her chest. She had always known that the world of the Dark Lord was one of treachery, that everyone had their own ambitions and schemes. But now she realized just how precarious her position truly was. To be near Voldemort, to share in his power, was a blessing and a curse. She had to walk a tightrope, balancing loyalty with the growing strength she wielded. "I will not fail you, my lord," Bellatrix said, her voice unwavering. "No one will control me." Voldemort's lips curled into the faintest of smiles, cold but unmistakably approving. "Good," he murmured. "Good." The months slipped by, and Bellatrix found herself at the heart of Voldemort's plans more than ever before. His vision for the wizarding world had become more ambitious, more ruthless. The world outside was changing, and the war seemed to be reaching its boiling point. The Muggle-borns, the Half-Bloods, every group that had once held a semblance of peace in the world was now in the Dark Lord's sights. But as the power of Voldemort's forces grew, so did Bellatrix's place within them. She had become indispensable, her cunning and ruthlessness unmatched by any of his other followers. Yet there was something inside her, a restless feeling that gnawed at the edges of her mind. The power she had tasted was intoxicating, but the price it demanded was more than she had ever realized. Every victory, every death she had caused, every order she had followed had taken something from her. She could feel it, a slow erosion of something she couldn't put her finger on. Was it her soul? Her humanity? She didn't know. What she did know was that her loyalty to Voldemort was becoming something more. Something darker. More personal. She couldn't help but think of him, of their connection, at the oddest moments. The way he commanded her attention, his presence always looming like a shadow over her every thought. It was no longer just about power or loyalty. It was something else entirely. One evening, as Bellatrix prepared for another mission, the anticipation of the coming violence hanging heavy in the air, she found herself once again standing before Voldemort. The Death Eaters had gathered, ready for another strike, but it was clear that this particular mission was of utmost importance to him. "My lord," she said, her voice calm but tinged with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "I am ready." Voldemort turned to her, his red eyes narrowing slightly as he assessed her. There was a flicker of something in his expression, something like approval, but it quickly vanished as his gaze hardened. "Bellatrix," he said softly, but with a weight behind the words, "you have become powerful, more than I ever expected. But remember, power is not without its cost, not for you, not for anyone." Her breath caught at his words, but she didn't show any sign of weakness. She had heard him speak of power's price before, but something about this moment felt different. It felt more personal. "My lord," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, "I have given everything for you. I will continue to give, as long as you require it." There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something almost human. It was fleeting, but it was enough to make her wonder if she had misread him all this time. Was it possible that he, too, felt something more for her? Something deeper than mere utility? But just as quickly as the thought crossed her mind, Voldemort's cold demeanor returned. He stepped closer to her, his voice low and commanding. "You are more than a tool to me, Bellatrix," he said, his words sending a thrill through her, despite herself. "But never forget, your power is mine to command. Do not let it control you." Bellatrix swallowed, her heart racing, but she nodded. She knew better than anyone the dangers of growing too powerful, of letting her own ambitions get in the way of the Dark Lord's vision. She had learned that lesson the hard way, but still, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something different between them now. Something that neither of them could control. As Voldemort turned to leave, Bellatrix hesitated for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. She wanted to ask him something that had been on her mind for weeks now. But the words wouldn't come. There was a question in her heart, a yearning that she couldn't quite understand. "My lord," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "What happens when the war ends? When you've won? What is it that you truly want?" Voldemort paused in the doorway, his figure framed by the shadows. He didn't turn around at first, but when he did, there was a strange expression on his face, something unreadable, something almost wistful. "What do I want?" he repeated, almost to himself. Then with a sigh he looked at her. "I want a world where there is no weakness, no mudbloods, no half-bloods, only those who are pure, who are strong. I want a world where fear is absolute, where I am the ultimate power. And you, Bellatrix, you will stand by me, at my side, in that world." His words sent a chill through her. She had heard him speak of his plans before, but something about the way he said it now felt different. There was a finality to his tone, a sense that the war would indeed come to an end. And then? What? Would they rule together as he had promised? Or would there be no place for her once he had won? The question lingered in the air between them, but before she could voice it, Voldemort turned and left, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the room. Bellatrix stood there for a long time after, her thoughts swirling like the dark magic that surrounded them both. She had become something more than a servant, but at what cost? She had power. Yes, but would it be enough to ensure her place at his side when the dust settled? Would Voldemort see her as a true partner, or simply as another tool to be discarded when the war was over? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but Bellatrix refused to let it show. She had walked this path for so long, and she would see it through to the end, no matter the price. The end of the war was in sight. The forces of Voldemort were growing stronger with each passing day, and the Order of the Phoenix, though determined, was faltering beneath the weight of the Dark Lord's power. Bellatrix could feel it, the palpable anticipation in the air as the final battle loomed. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when Voldemort's reign would become absolute. But in the silence that followed each victory, Bellatrix found herself filled with an unfamiliar restlessness. She had fought so long, so relentlessly, for this moment. And now that it was within reach, she felt the void growing inside her. Power, she had come to realize, was not enough. It was never enough, not when it came with this cost, this gnawing uncertainty about what would come after. She had pledged her loyalty to Voldemort, followed him through countless dark rituals and blood-soaked nights, and yet, as the final war drew near, she couldn't escape the question that lingered like a shadow in the corners of her mind. What would be left for her once the war ended? Bellatrix had served her master with unmatched devotion, but even she could feel the coldness creeping in. Voldemort had always been a master of control, of power, but in those rare moments when they were alone, she had begun to notice something more. There were fleeting moments of tenderness, strange, unspoken moments that tugged at the heart of her doubts. A glance, a word, a moment where he wasn't the Dark Lord, but just him. And in those moments, Bellatrix found herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't ignore. But was that all it was? A passing infatuation? Or was there something more? Was she, after all this time, truly more than a mere tool in his hands? As the final battle loomed, Bellatrix found herself alone in her chambers one evening, her thoughts restless. She was preparing for the mission that would carry her to the heart of the wizarding world, to the battle that would decide everything. Yet, despite the urgency of the war, she couldn't shake the overwhelming need to see Voldemort, to speak with him one last time before the storm broke. She found him in his private chamber, the light from the fire casting long shadows across the room. His figure was tall and imposing, his face as cold and unreadable as always. But when his eyes met hers, something flickered, something faint yet undeniably there. "My lord," Bellatrix said, her voice a mix of resolve and something softer, something she couldn't quite name. "The time has come." Voldemort's gaze held hers, unwavering. "Yes," he replied, his voice low and cold. "The final battle is upon us. You've done well, Bellatrix. Your loyalty has been unmatched." She nodded, but her heart was pounding now, and she could feel the weight of what she had to ask pressing against her chest. It was a question she had never dared to ask before, but now it felt necessary. Now it felt like the only thing that mattered. "My lord," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Once the war is over, once you have conquered the world, what will happen to me? What will become of those of us who have served you?" For a moment, Voldemort didn't answer. He simply stared at her, his red eyes flickering with something unreadable. The fire crackled in the silence, but it felt as if the world itself had stopped waiting for his response. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "You have earned your place beside me, Bellatrix. You will be rewarded for your loyalty. When the world is mine, there will be no one who stands above you." She could feel her heart race at his words, but even as the thrill of his promise surged through her, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more, something he wasn't saying. He spoke of rewards, of power, but there was something cold and distant in his words, something that made her wonder if she had been fooling herself all along. "And what of us?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What of you and I, my lord?" Voldemort's expression remained impassive, but for the briefest of moments his gaze softened. It was almost imperceptible, a fleeting moment that Bellatrix would have missed if she hadn't been watching so closely. He took a step closer to her, his presence overwhelming, and for a long moment they simply stood there, locked in that unspoken connection. "I do not need a partner, Bellatrix," Voldemort said quietly, his voice like ice. "Not in the way you may imagine." Her heart sank at his words. She had known this, hadn't she? She had known that Voldemort was not a man who sought love, affection, or companionship. He sought power, nothing more, nothing less. The bond they shared, whatever it was born out of mutual ambition, not anything deeper. She had allowed herself to hope, but now she understood the truth. "But you have been loyal to me," he continued, his voice taking on a slightly colder edge. "And that loyalty will be rewarded. You will have power, Bellatrix. The world will bow to us, and you will stand at my side. That is all I offer." Bellatrix nodded, the weight of his words settling deep within her chest. She had known this was always how it would be. She had known he was incapable of offering anything more. The cold truth of it was undeniable, and though it stung, she forced herself to accept it. She had sacrificed everything for this moment, for this vision of power, and nothing, nothing would change that. "I understand, my lord," she said, her voice steady, though her heart felt heavier than ever. Voldemort's gaze softened again, but only for a brief second. "Good," he replied. "You are strong, Bellatrix, stronger than most." As she turned to leave, the weight of his words echoed in her mind. She had done it. She had helped bring him to the precipice of his victory. But what would she have left when the dust settled? What would become of her once he had all he desired? For now, there were no answers. There was only the war, only the final battle that would decide everything. Bellatrix had given everything for this moment, but in the end, it was unclear whether anything would remain for her at all.